For centuries, the desolate stretches of the ancient Judean landscape stood as a physical testament to a long period of divine exile and restitution. Yet embedded in the text of Isaiah is a sudden, definitive shift, a hard pivot from historical punishment to an era of unshakable comfort. Looking directly at the ancient text of Isaiah chapter 12, verse 1, we read, "And in that day thou shalt say, O Lord, I will praise thee. Though thou wast angry with me, thine anger is turned away, and thou comfortest me." The phrasing here is deliberate. This is not a generic poetic sentiment. It marks a strictly defined pivotal era in prophetic history. So, what exactly is this specific day that ends divine anger, and what conditions make it historically definitive? The text immediately transitions to the profound imagery of life-giving water, replacing the long historical drought of exile. In this specific biblical context, the concept of salvation carries dual weight. It offers spiritual comfort, but it also dictates a literal, physical deliverance from destruction. Historically, the Jewish people faced a constant, looming fear of annihilation. Isaiah 12 contrasts that reality with a rigid, documented promise of fearlessness. This establishes what we can call the axiom of finality. It is a theological framework stating that once an ultimate gathering occurs, it can never be followed by another exile. To understand the permanence of the comfort promised in chapter 12, we first have to map the agonizing historical prerequisites outlined in the preceding chapters. If we define the timeline of this prophecy by looking backward, we see that a severe divine restitution had to be paid in full before this comfort could arrive. In chapters 9 and 10, Isaiah describes the severity of this punishment, emphasizing his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. This prophetic wrath was first fulfilled by the initial scattering, a 70-year captivity in Babylon. This relief provides historical proof of the 70 AD second scattering. It removed the Jewish population, scattering them into a reality resembling hell on earth. But then, in Isaiah 11, verse 11, we find a specific prophecy. It states, "The Lord will set his hand a second time to recover his people's remnant." This second time maps directly to the 20th century geopolitical restoration, specifically the turning point between 1917 and 1947, when the gathering back to Palestine began. Consequently, the Day of Comfort celebrated in Isaiah 12 is directly contingent upon the completion of that 1,900-year second dispersion. The second verse of chapter 12 reads, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid." Here, fearlessness is framed as a geopolitical guarantee. Rabbinic scholars, including Rabbi Or HaChaim, analyzed this text and concluded a strict rule. There is absolutely no biblical prophecy for a third destruction. This theological reading became a literal lifeline during the existential threats of the mid-20th century. As World War II escalated, the Axis powers advanced toward the Middle East, presenting what looked like the absolute impending destruction of the Jewish homeland. Military leaders mapped out terrifying invasion routes, with armies preparing to strike from Egypt and Syria. The government offered passports to the chief rabbinic leaders, urging them to evacuate. They refused to leave, deciding based entirely on the biblical absence of a third exile prophecy. Their refusal to flee was not blind optimism. It was a rigorous, literal adherence to the finality of the second gathering outlined by Isaiah. In response to the encroaching military threat, Kabbalists engaged in intense, desperate intercessory prayer at ancestral tombs. These prayers were a direct petition for mercy, an attempt to invoke a divine intervention that would halt the massive military forces gathering at the borders. Within this spiritual context, the subsequent shift in grand military strategy was viewed not as a coincidence, but as an answered petition. A linguistic correlation was observed in Hebrew. The letters for Syria, conceptually transposed. Rearranged, they spell the Hebrew word for Russia. Historically, the invading forces did abandon the Syrian route, inexplicably breaking existing treaties to launch a disastrous invasion into Russia instead. That chaotic military pivot into the brutal Russian winter broke the offensive and initiated the downfall of the invading army. For those who witnessed these events through the lens of Scripture, this massive diversion served as a historical validation of the protective promise in Isaiah 12:2. The region would continue to face localized wars and geopolitical troubles, but the foundational threat of total national uprooting was permanently off the table. The second return established a fixed theological rule. Once the children begin returning to their land in this final era, the door shuts. There is no going back. This wide view of the restored physical land provides proof of that permanence. The population has seen continuous growth in the exact geographic regions prophesied. Compare this modern permanence with the preceding 19 centuries, an era defined by brutal wandering and total instability. Crossing this threshold represents the true comfort promised in Isaiah 12, verse 1. It is the definitive move from the penalty phase of history into the inheritance phase. This restoration represents the concluding act of a strict prophetic legal framework regarding divine restitution, far exceeding the significance of a typical political event. Isaiah 12, verse 3 concludes the thought, "Therefore with joy shall ye draw water out of the wells of salvation." Looking down into a physical stone-lined well grounds this metaphor. In the ancient Near East, drawing water was the ultimate symbol of survival and permanence after a deadly drought. The specific use of the word joy connects directly to the psychological relief of surviving the imminent threat of a third destruction. The wells represent the deep historical promises that the returning remnant is finally able to access, draw from, and utilize to rebuild. The physical return to the geographic land and the spiritual access to salvation function side by side. They are inseparable components of the exact same divine decree. The joy found in Isaiah 12 echoes back to the original, foundational deliverance of the Jewish people from Egypt under Moses. In Exodus 15, Moses declared, "The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation." Isaiah uses this exact parallel language. By utilizing these specific words, Isaiah is intentionally linking the magnitude of this final second gathering to the historical weight of the very first Exodus. The second gathering marks the ultimate permanent transition. A people move from the paralyzing fear of historical wrath to the enduring joy of divine comfort. The ancient text of Isaiah stands as a documented blueprint of modern history, confirming the final conclusion of the exile.